Welcome to Footy4MySoul, where curiosity, caring, courage, and creativity shape our exploration of this beautiful game. Connecting experiences from the pitch to life. This is your space to learn and to be inspired. Whether you're a player, coach, parent, mentor, or anyone, let us enjoy this journey of beautiful growth. Welcome, everyone, to Footy4MySoul. I'm excited to introduce Chris White, the founder and executive director of Rosati Leadership Academy. Chris is a coach, a social entrepreneur, a leader, and I think you'll really enjoy his story to listen to how he's impacted soccer through his life. He's dedicated his life to using soccer as a tool for personal and community growth, and his leadership along the way is rooted in kindness, mentorship, and the power of accountability. He spent decades working with athletes at all levels, from coaching at the top college ranks at Duke, University of Miami, Colgate, and then working with kids in ODP, and at the younger ages with Rosati Leadership Academy, which we'll talk about. His coaching philosophy draws from his time studying with clubs in LaLiga and some impactful work in Colombia, where he's helped break barriers and make soccer more accessible to all. We talk about the steps along his journey. Together, we're going to dig into some heartfelt stories about small acts of kindness and how they can create a ripple effect, the butterfly effect, spreading positivity and lasting change within the game and beyond. Our topics are going to span Spanish football culture, the evolution of women's soccer coaching, revolutionizing American soccer through futsal, and the power of kindness and leadership and more. So thank you. Please don't forget to subscribe to Footy4MySoul, and please visit our website. You can read our Experiences Connected journal. It's on our site or on Substack. Well, we're going to delve deeper into what we've spoken about today, draw upon what we've learned. So stay tuned, enjoy the podcast, learn about how soccer can transform our lives both on and off the pitch. Thank you so much. Chris White, welcome to Footy4MySoul.
Thanks so much for having me, my friend.
It's great to see you.
So excited to be here.
You're going to take us through many continents, and the lenses are going to be exceptional, right? Because I know we're going to start with the curiosity that you had in yourself to take yourself at a relatively young age to Spain, and then the courage to take yourself to Colombia as you've matured as a coach and now a social entrepreneur at Rosati Leadership Academy, which is the most incredible organization that we're going to end with. But I think it's so important for our viewers, our supporters, to hear the story of you as you are now in Maine, but have lived in many places, have had some exceptional experiences. So thank you. I'm going to really tee this up for you to, instead of thinking about right now, I want to take us back to that opportunity, a lot of choices when you were at the soccer camp and you had risen up through coaching at an elite goalkeeper school. When you had choices presented, why LaLiga? And reflect on that, given you know where we're ending here. This is about a player, whether it's grassroots or a 50-year-old man or woman still kicking the ball around, an aspiring coach that wants best practices, or a caregiver, which could be a parent, and more often, as we're going to talk about, a mentor. But think about the curiosity it took you to get you to Spain and LaLiga, and then kick us off to this journey through 3 continents, and ultimately we're going to end up at Rosati Leadership Academy.
Thank you so much. I would just say first I just want to say by saying thank you to all the different people in my life that have given me opportunities and just opportunities to learn and to, get to know people and to go do amazing things. Like when you say it took a lot of courage, to me, it was almost like, I wouldn't say it took a lot of courage, because to me, it felt like just an incredible opportunity that I just couldn't walk away from. Because the LaLiga visits and study was actually kind of a byproduct of karma, is the way I look at it, because my father was a professor at the University of North Carolina when I was growing up, and Anson Dorrance was the famous, men's and women's soccer coach at the University of North Carolina. Eventually, he just chose the women's team to continue on for his full career. But basically, my father at a very young age told me basically right when I finished college, he told me to go talk to Anson, because I really did want to get into soccer coaching. And so as soon as I walked into Anson's office with a notebook full of all these questions intended to be like, hey, if he answers all these questions, boom. And if I do those things, I can become a wonderful coach. And as soon as I asked him the first question, he was like, Chris, shut your notebook. And that's when he invited me to UNC women's team camp, because generally speaking, countrywide, in the summertime in the United States, lots of colleges and universities have summer soccer camps. The difference at University of North Carolina women's was Anson just had a curriculum that just was deeper and more thoughtful and more effective than anybody else in the country. At that time, he had already probably won between 10 and 15 national championships. Yeah. And he's amazing. He always says that he stole his best methods from Dean Smith, methods and methodologies, because Dean Smith used to chart everything. He was the famous men's basketball coach at the University of North Carolina, coached Michael Jordan, among other things. But he was a real social entrepreneur too. But to bring us back into play, Anson constantly genuflects to Dean Smith and says, I basically just copied his system. And that's complete BS. He did bring the system of counting everything, plotting everything, and holding everybody accountable. But he really turned it in. He took it to another level, and he called it the competitive cauldron, which is kind of getting famous now, and it should be famous for the last 40 or 50 years. Because basically, as soon as a player walks onto the practice field, every single thing they do gets charted and marked down, from physical fitness testing to attacking 1v1 with back to the goal, called Bogeys in the Sky, famous one, to they even plotted. In certain parts of practice, you'll have small-sided games. And every time that small-sided team would win a game, those players would get a certain number of points, and the team that lost would not get those points. And so it was incredible. He was basically getting as close as possible to he did. He created the most incredible system of accountability that I've ever seen, and it works. He's not only won all these national championships, what's more important is the hundreds of women that have graduated out of his program over the last 47 years and have gone on to incredible careers, because I don't think at the end of the day Anson's a soccer coach. He's a leadership coach. He's a motivation coach. He's a life coach, because anybody that's even shared the oxygen in a room with Anson Dorrance for 30 seconds will now go through a wall for this man. There's something about him. There's something about how he can get the most out of people. Literally, people go through walls. I think that phrase was invented after talking to student athletes that have worked with Anson Dorrance.
And but curious because it was through that relationship with Anson and through, just having that vigor and just being creative and working hard and knowing you as a person, you were very inquisitive. You always want to understand,
yes,
right?
Yes.
So then he introduced you to other coaches, and we're going to get into this butterfly effect later. Mm-hmm. Is he the one who flapped his wings that made it possible for those downstream effects that, are we going to call you Hurricane White or whatever that was, right? That became of 100%. You, that got you to that opportunity. And so I'm curious where you had that opportunity to go to LaLiga, and it really comes back to that relationship.
Right.
But you had other choices. It was kind of where do you want to go?
Right.
And, at that point, I think it's fair to say, football, soccer, footy, whatever we want to call it here in America, is British dominated, right? UK dominated, Scottish dominated, right? Yep. You wouldn't have thought, hey, I want to go to Real Madrid. Right. If anything, hey, I want to go to Manchester United was probably the leading team back. That was probably a little before the Alex Ferguson days, but around that period, right? So what got you to LaLiga? Because what's so interesting there, as we know the butterfly flapped its wings. We know you're in a position here to do something and remind us the age you were at when you went out there, because I think what we're going to learn, regardless of the stakeholder, who you are listening to this, is that the decision to go to Spain, which then probably led you to the futsal to Colombia, there's probably some causality there, right? Led to so much of where you are today, working on a futsal court with future leaders and kids. Yeah. So, so what was the driving force to say, I want to go to Spain? Where'd it come from?
It was a couple of things. One is I always want to learn from the best, and I know that LaLiga to me is a direct outgrowth of Dutch pure soccer from the Dutch, the Ajax and all that, and the Raymond Verhooyen. I mean, there's a whole, and Cruyff and the goalkeeper coach Franz Hoek. They all came down from Ajax to Barcelona, which really so Spanish soccer nowadays is really Dutch soccer, but nobody really wants to talk about that, and that's fine.
We will on one of our discussions, but we can't today.
But basically, when I went to Anson's camp, he said, come to the team camp, because there's the UNC Women has their regular soccer camp, and it's incredible. It's probably the best in the country. But they also have team camp, which takes it to an exponential next level in terms of learning, because that's where Anson literally, and I've never met, he's the master of all masters, and he doesn't keep any secrets. Like if you ask him a question about anything, he'll open up the books completely. So the cool thing about team camp was, he would give lectures at lunchtime and after dinner, and he would give coaching demos in the morning and the afternoon. So I was literally, I showed up at camp the first day, and I go, Anson, I'll do anything. Do you want me to fill the water bottles, water coolers? Do you want me to shine your shoes? What do you want from me? Like you're the biggest all-time Jedi coach ever. And he goes, no, just walk around and learn from the different coaches. And I was like, wow. And so during team camp, 15 different teams would come to camp, and each one was a full team. And so Anson had 10 or 15 of his best nationwide coaches running those sessions. So I was literally going from coach to coach every day, watching how different coaches taught the same exact skill set from different perspectives. And every day I'd be like, Anson, who should I pal around with today? And every day he'd tell me a different person, and sure as, anything. Every day I'd learn something new and golden from a new coach. But basically, so I feel like I learned the system pretty well. And then what happened was, one of Coach Anson Dorrance's assistants is Chris Ducar. He's just as much of a mentor as Anson's been to me, because Chris Ducar was Tony DeChico's goalkeeper, director of Soccer Plus. Tony DeChico's our former national team coach. He was the assistant coach under Anson Dorrance. Then when Anson stepped down, Tony became the head coach. And then Chris Ducar was running his nationwide Soccer Plus camps, which is the creme de la creme of goalkeeper culture in the United States. And so Chris Ducar put me in touch with Tony DeChico and said, it's time for you to join the Soccer Plus staff. So I was over the moon, so amazed. And again, just tons of learning. And it was weird. It just comes down to karma, because in my life, the best things in life have happened because of pure luck, and then just the hard work to come up behind it. And so what happened was, I called up Tony DeChico, signed me up for camp, and then I showed up at camp, and everything was going fantastic. And then it was weird. Every day at the dining hall, 3 meals a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, I would see this one girl all by herself. 100 people in camp over here, and this one girl all by herself, and that just makes my heart go cold. So for 2 weeks, and it was clear she didn't speak English. So for 2 weeks, all I would do was give her a smile and a high five every meal for 2 weeks.
Here, oh no, sir is too much. A random act of kindness. This is something that we will talk about the remainder of this episode, but I want to just isolate it right now. At the time, did you consider what you were doing a random act of kindness, or what was it about you and your soul and who you were? Because there's a lot of coaches, and everyone's out there trying to get, one-upping the next person.
Right.
Not everybody goes out of their way to care. And obviously we know beyond the curiosity is caring.
Yep.
I think it's the caring that drives these random acts of kindness. So I just want, as you go, I've heard the story once before. I think it's amazing. But now that there'll be people all over the world potentially listening to this, I want for those listening to think about what this really means as a random act of kindness and what that can do for you. So I'm sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you so much. Actually, I'd back it up and say Anson Dorrance is the one that started this story with me because he created a random act of kindness to invite me to his camp and allow me to work with him for 15, 17 summers in a row and just learn unbelievable from him. But yeah, so yeah, I don't know. I mean, it must have come from my family culture, my mom and dad. You know, I spent time living in Japan when I was a kid. My dad was a political science professor at the University of North Carolina, which is how he played rugby with Anson in college. So that's how that connection was made. So yeah, I would say the random act of kindness came from Anson to allow me to come into this learning experience. And then I took advantage of it, and I was just kind of myself, and I saw a kid kind of lonely, and I just did something that I thought was almost meaningless, but maybe give her a tiny little smile. Because, you know, I lived in Japan for 2 years when I was a kid, when my dad was doing research over there for a full year, and I went to Japanese school. And I remember how lonely it was and how hard it is to be in a place where you can't communicate, and how meaningful it is when somebody kind of breaks down that barrier and says hello to you and kind of brings you in. I mean, I just grew up with that whole sort of, you know, Oliver Twist sort of, you know, Charles Dickens, like there's these kids that are just getting downtrodden, and, you know, it just takes that one little magic connection or mentorship that can take that kid into the dream of their life. And that's what happened to me, because as soon as Chris Ducar, Big Bird, introduced me to DeChico, and I went and demonstrated that I knew what I was doing, and I was a tremendous amount of learning as well in that situation. But at the end of the camp, Uncle Tony just came up to me and he said, "Hey, you know, I've got this kid from Spain and she needs to fly home, and she says that you're the only one in camp that'll trust you, that she'll trust to drive her to the airport." And I was like, wow, that's so cool. That's so like, but I was like, who the heck is he talking about? Like, what's he talking about? Because I never even knew this girl's name. I never said a word to her, you know, because it was clear she didn't speak English. And so he goes, and then he points to her, and she comes walking over. Oh, that's the girl that I say hi to all the time in the dining hall. And she comes over, and it turns out she's got a flight home the next day. So I took her to the airport. Her flight got canceled. And since she was an unaccompanied minor, I think she was 14 at the time, because she had a connecting flight through Philly or something, and so she would have missed the connection, and she would have been stranded in a city, so they wouldn't let her start the trip. So she was stuck with me. So immediately she starts crying. She calls up her dad over in Spain. They're talking, and then she hands the phone to me. I can hear him crying, and then I go, "Look, it's not the end of the world. You know, you can either buy us 2 hotel rooms at the airport, because Tony DeChico's Soccer Plus camp moves from city to city. They've already left. They're at the next city already. So you can either get us 2 hotel rooms at the airport, and I'll put your daughter on the very first flight tomorrow morning, or you can trust me to make this the best 24 hours of her summer." And I couldn't believe it. You know, here's this guy in Spain, 3,000 miles from his daughter, and he's like, I'll never forget him in this real deep Spanish accent. He goes, "If Tony DeChico trusts you with my daughter," and I'm doing a Brooklyn accent, which is garbage, but he goes, I'll never forget, he goes, "If Tony DeChico trusts you with my daughter, I trust you with my daughter." And he hung up the phone. I was like, holy crap, wow. But immediately, you know, at the time I was coaching at Colgate University, which is where the camp was held. So I had 2 club teams that I was coaching, 2 girls, U14, U15 girls teams. So I called up the team manager and I said, immediately, open your lake house, and I want both these teams over there doing a sleepover party, and make this girl feel like home, like she's at home. So they did it. I went and dropped her off. I went home, got a good night's sleep. The next day at noon, I drive back up at lunchtime, and I drive up to their lake house. And here comes this girl water skiing across the lake, and she had the biggest smile, and they're like grilling hot dogs, hamburgers, chicken, whatever. And it was amazing. Took her, put her on the plane. She went home, and about a week later, I got an email from her dad saying, "We have to repay you for your kindness and your safety, taking care of our daughter." She did say that was the most fun she had the whole summer. "And please, you got to come visit us, and come for a long time, because you're going to come study if you want with LaLiga."
And he had a job, like a pretty good job, maybe?
At the time, I was at Colgate University.
No, what was his job?
Sorry. Yeah, the best part was at the end of that email, I almost fell out of my chair, because at the end, he signs off with El Presidente LaLiga. And I fell out of my chair.
Exactly.
And so I'm like, obviously, I'm going to go visit this man. He's the president of LaLiga. And so he goes, "Do you want to meet Messi? Do you want to meet Ronaldo? Like, what do you want to go to Barcelona games, Real Madrid games?" And I go, "No." I go, I'm selfish. I don't want to see any of those guys. I don't want to go to the games. I want you to take me to the old grizzled 60, 70, 80-year-old Jedi master coaches that nobody's heard of. Those are the actual coaches that create that love and that passion and that ability inside the kids. So he goes, Chris, I've never heard an answer like that. Every time somebody comes and visits me, they just want to go to see Barcelona. So I spent a week at Espanyol, which is kind of the poor club, the player development club that then sells their players to Barcelona across town. So I spent a week there. I spent a week with Real Madrid, a week with Athletic Bilbao, and a week with Rayo Vallecano, the other big club in Madrid, and it changed my life completely.
Give me a year. Give me about what year was this?
This was 2010.
2008,
2009.
So where's Messi at this point?
Messi's with Barcelona.
And he's with the trio, isn't he, at that point? Are they
they
all playing at that point? Iniesta and Xavi?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think Ronaldinho and Henry had gone by that time. But, yeah, Iniesta, Xavi, and Messi were
okay, so 99% out of 100 would have probably selected that one, I would guess,
100%,
right?
You know, Piqué, Mascherano, all those guys.
Yeah, okay. Of the 4 clubs that you spent the time with, most memorable one was which one?
They were all spectacular for different reasons, and I came out of there with such an unbelievable sort of... The Spanish, they don't make the game complicated, you know. They set up the incredible player development. They set up the player environment. And what I was astounded by was the lack of yelling and the lack of volume from coaches.
Coaches were quiet.
Everywhere I went, it was the same. It was almost like church.
Were they respectful to you being an American? Or is it because they knew that El Presidente brought you over? It's like, oh, this is El Presidente's intro. Here's the red carpet. Right. Or were they genuinely respectful? Because I get the sense that the culture in Spain and football, massive respect levels, right? So you were treated well?
Yeah, I think it was half and half. First of all, I think I won't say his name because I don't want to get him in trouble, but the president of LaLiga, I think probably embellished on who I was, because every club I went to, I walked in like the Queen of Belgium or something, like the King of Belgium. I mean, but then what would happen was I'd be there every day at like 7 a.m, and I'd be there all the way till 7 o'clock at night in my notebook. And so very quickly they realized that I wasn't messing around, and they really respected that.
Okay, stop for a second. So now let's jump ahead to 2010, 15 years later. And we're going to talk about Rosati later. But you're on a gym floor with 100 kids from many countries.
Yep.
The wealth is not part of the equation.
Correct.
Okay.
Well, there is.
There's some which
my wealth and my privilege has been everything behind this club.
Exactly. No, I'm talking about the kids there that you're working with and Rosati, which we'll get to.
Yep.
And you have the floor, and at this point you're not playing football. You're not playing futsal with them. You're talking about life skills through soccer and leadership. How much of what we're going to talk about later were seeded from these LaLiga?
Everything, because those experiences in LaLiga, it was crazy. I met, they call it the Cantera over there. They have their senior team, and then the U19s, U18s, down to 12, 13, whatever, and that's called the Cantera. And so what I would do was I would set up in the morning, and then, all day long I would be watching. So I would watch every single age group and every single coach. And as the week progressed towards game day on Saturday with the senior team, the practices would be ramped up, the competitiveness, the quality of the coaching, and it would build up into this crescendo. And then when I would go at the end of the day to the senior men's sessions, all the Cantera coaches would be there. So you got 20 players, but you also have almost 20 coaches. And they all knew me intimately. And so they were all coming by, telling me exactly what was going on in each sort of phase and progressions of all the lesson plans.
I am curious that, today, Spanish women's football is equal to or better than the U.S., depending, right?
Yep.
Okay. And we saw that coming 4 years, 8 years ago. They're the World Cup reigning champion.
Right.
They lost to Brazil recently in the Olympics when the U.S. won the gold medal. Yep. But take us back 14 years, because women's soccer has largely, outside of America, been a function of opportunity. Because the system is different, right? We don't have the high school systems over there like you do here, and you have the money in sports, in soccer there. But Spain and those clubs had the money. In 2010, I'm assuming that women's football was growing and big, but when you went to these events, was it segregated to the extent?
Yeah, it was two worlds back then. That
Okay.
was right before the money came in, because technically at the time, I remember one of the coaches at Espanyol said, there's not a single coach in Spain that gets paid to coach women. And it blew me away. So all their coaches at the time were volunteers.
15 years ago.
Yeah. But then it's just absolutely exploded. To me, it comes down to culture and religion. I feel like some of the religions of some of those, Spain's Catholic, Mexico's Catholic, a lot of the South American countries are very Catholic. And I feel like for whatever reason, the cultures associated with that religion have not been as ready and willing to push their girls out to play soccer. But I think the secret's out. And now those countries and cultures are playing soccer, and they have a beautiful tradition. And so now I think America is definitely looking over our shoulders. And the days of the women's team being, only having like one person to compete against, China for a long time, or Norway or Sweden or whatever, those days are over. And now the U.S. is going to be hard pressed. We're going to have a hard time.
We're going to have a hard time. So we'll get back to the men, but just curiosity, of those coaches that you spent the time with then, do you believe they are coaching? The quality of coach for women's, to me, I would argue in the States, there's no difference. It's ubiquitous.
Yeah.
The coaches, men's or women's, it does not matter.
Right.
Okay, it's similar, and the processes are the same.
Sure.
Are the processes the same in Spain today, do you believe? And do you believe that I don't mean you're still not in touch with a lot of these clubs, but
Right.
your perspective was primarily on the men's group. Just also last question on women. Did you see any women's soccer when you were there? Women's football when you were there? Was it entirely a men's trip?
Yeah, I did see women, but only, I think Espanyol had a team. Real Madrid did not have a team. I don't think Rayo had a team, and Athletic Bilbao did have a team. And those were three. It was interesting because, Espanyol is to Barcelona what Rayo is to Real Madrid,
Yeah.
right? It's the poor club in town that has to have the coaches that can create the talent to then sell it. Whereas Real Madrid and Barcelona, the dirty secret is they buy their talent. It's just at a young age, so you think that they develop it. It is what it is. But my train of thought was going towards something that I've lost now. The women, there were only two women that had teams. Yeah, and there was just no respect whatsoever.
No, I took you off, which is fine. I want to give context, I think, to a lot of the folks listening here, because it's so interesting as we talk about the men's, your experience.
Yep.
And we're going to end up at a place where we're talking about coaching young women wearing hijabs.
Right.
Today.
Right.
And who would have thought, the juxtaposition
Right.
of Real Madrid didn't have a women's team 15 years ago with any sort of support.
Right.
And now in Lewiston, Maine, we're working with a 12-year-old girl, young aspiring leader.
Right.
And how much has changed.
Opening the doors.
And that young 10, 12, 14-year-old girl is getting some with your perspective.
Right.
Right? And that's obviously why we're talking about it. Okay. So from your journey, because we're going to talk about you as a college coach, and how much of being a college coach before you became a social entrepreneur, which I consider you today as a college coach, how much of what you went through in the 20s and your 30s was it LaLiga, kind of as the seeds that grew, or what else was part of that journey? Do you want to? I'd love to head to futsal and to Colombia and so forth. But I'm curious, when you came home right after your time in Spain, what'd you do? What was the next couple of years of your life, and how were you different?
The amazing thing was, at the time I was at Colgate University, upstate New York, and there was another man who was a great mentor to me named Chris McLean. And he taught me an unbelievable amount. And his mentor was Todd Sniper. So that brings us full circle back to the Northeast. So at the time, Chris McLean opened a soccer club, and it was all about just technical, small-sided player development. We don't care about trophies. And it was in the middle of upstate New York. This is not a soccer hotbed. So we took a bunch of farm kids and turned them into big-time players. We had two players that get invited to national team camps, and were perennial regional team players. So we blew things up in an area that shouldn't have been good at soccer. But thank God he was in the same vein as I was in terms of the small-sided, the technical, the not over-coaching, focusing on development over trophies. We didn't care if we won or lose. We wanted to play beautiful soccer.
Well, as you thought of that, though, Chris, you're kind of like, wait a minute, these guys, these coaches, they're like the coaches in Spain. But they weren't trained in Spain. They were trained in the traditional American system.
Right.
So would you say that these, it's a bit of luck to fall into a group of people like-minded, willing to think differently, be more creative.
Yeah.
Right? And because
we weren't interested in making money. Every club that the traditional American club's great at making money, but they're terrible at creating talent, and they're terrible at creating mental health. They create unbelievable pressure, totally crazy values out of proportion, and they focus on winning now and winning trophies, and that just creates this whole system where the values are not connected to anything anymore. We were anti that. We were anti-trophies. We were anti making money. We were anti this whole model where you got to fly to Southern California from the Northeast 4, 5, 6 times a year. And we didn't charge $2,000, and we didn't mandate people, you have to use this airline to fly there. You have to stay in this hotel. We basically existed to say, no, the normal sort of usual American club system is crap. The values are garbage. And they're trying to make money, and they're making money, just like U.S. soccer. We make more money in the world than any country, but we're terrible. We can't even qualify for the World Cup on the men's side usually, and the women are going to get harder and harder pressed to come out of there with top 4, top 2 finishes. That just gets into the whole American system that's just totally misplaced.
Okay, well, as we think about how we can make the American system better, one way would be to align some of the great benefits of futsal.
Right.
And I'm sure you'll get into it, but it's not just possession for possession's sake. It's creativity and all the things that we with a purpose we can get into. And it would be great to get into one of the greatest books I believe ever written on the sport, called Shoeless Soccer. And we'll have an episode on that at some point. Nice. To talk about. But if you think about this, the line of this question is not to be negative towards U.S. soccer in any way. It's actually the purpose of our podcast is to find the greatness and make a beautiful game more beautiful.
Nice.
Right? Mm-hmm. But you can't do that if you're delusional in thinking and you only tackle the easy stuff.
Right.
Sometimes we have to tackle some difficult subjects.
Right.
So what may come off as being negative is actually we're trying to be constructive. So I think part of critical thinking and thinking differently, and one of our core tenets, it does take courage and it does take creativity to maybe ask these different questions. You need to be curious, and I am curious that futsal is something which, again, in the club context, it's put out there as, we do futsal just because it's winter time and it's ways to charge more money, right? That's unfair to many clubs, potentially, because not everybody, right? These are general comments.
Right.
However, more often than not, it's a checkbox.
Right.
They really don't care.
Right.
So the system of football, footy, soccer, whatever you want to call it in this country, in the context of futsal, small-sided games, which we're going to get into in Colombia, and which I think is very important in your journey. Yeah. We will talk about how it can improve the American system.
Yeah.
Okay. But let's first understand what it's like outside these borders.
Yeah.
Okay. So take us to Colombia. Just let us know, about how old were you?
Yeah.
What were you trying to accomplish when you were there? Think about, this isn't about, I have this opportunity and it's cool. It's deep in your soul. Why are you going? There's lots of other things you could do.
Right.
What takes you to South America to understand futsal? I'd love for you to explain it, link it to LaLiga, and then that will be kind of our precursor to where you're at today.
Sweet. It all comes back to Anson again,
Yep.
Coming back from LaLiga, more than anything, it gave me confidence to know that what Anson was doing in the UNC system was exactly what they're doing at Rayo Vallecano, at Espanyol, at Real Madrid, Athletic Bilbao. Focus on technical, small-sided games, growth over outcome, and focus control what you can control, which is usually your attitude and your effort. I came back and honestly, I mean, the Spanish, I came back kind of with four things on my mind, which was the Spanish, their creativity was off the charts. The surfaces of their foot were absolutely incredible. I didn't see in a month, I didn't see anybody in the back half of their field lose the ball or even get challenged. They just, their communication, their awareness, and their technical abilities just means that nobody can ever take the ball off their foot in the back. And that gets rid of most of the good goal chances in a small-sided game because it's during transitions.
Yep.
The last thing that I really felt great about, the most important piece coming back from that Spain trip was knowing that I didn't really learn anything that new. I saw hundreds of beautiful training sessions that I've run over and over again since then. But to be honest, it was the idea that I didn't have my mind blown. I wasn't reborn. It just gave me an unbelievable confidence to know that Anson's world was the world of soccer that I needed to stick with. And so I came back, started coaching higher and higher levels. And then what happened was Anson started, and I had experience with futsal in Utah. I was out in Utah for a while coaching and teaching as well. But basically Anson really, for whatever reason, he thought that futsal was for real, because at the time I was like, ooh, futsal, this is probably between 2005 and 2010. I was like, this is nothing but the new flavor of the week. In American soccer, every 4 years we try to reinvent everything and say it's all new and different, but really it's the same coaches on the same fields with the same kids with the same methods and methodologies with a new bow on the top of it. But Anson...
with a really long grass.
Exactly, like spaghetti.
Like spaghetti
And
grass. The ball can't move.
Right. So what happened was Anson was like, there's something about futsal. And somehow he asked me, because I would always come home in the summers and work with him. And he was like, this one summer, he was like, can you go down and visit a couple futsal schools? Because I want to know who the real legit people are in the state of North Carolina doing futsal. So I went around and I came to Charlotte and barefoot soccer and a coach named Guillermo Uribe. And that guy has changed my life. He's got his hair on fire. You walk into the gym and his kids are blindfolded and they're barefoot. And you're like, what the heck is going on? And then it has a reason. Everything has a reason. And a lot of it is predicated on this barefoot. And there's all these physiological advantage to playing barefoot now. It's not just what the poor kids do, but ironically, if you don't have enough money for shoes and you play barefoot, physiologically, you might come out ahead of the kid who does have the money for the shoes. Just the way your foot can touch the ball and the surfaces and the tactile and the way your foot strikes the ground. Because a lot of, with our big, thick shoes nowadays, we strike the ground with our heels. But if you learn to play barefoot, you got to reduce that heel strike. That's the big deal about it.
An in-step drive barefoot feels great.
Oh, man.
Try taking a shot without an in-step drive barefoot and your foot's in pain. It teaches so much of technique as much as anything else.
Because it hurts like heck if you hit it wrong.
And you learn how to tackle differently. You don't go in with the wrong foot. You go in with the correct foot, with the correct balance. And actually, this should be an entire podcast on its own right, just playing soccer barefoot. And as you go down this path of futsal, for those that are just learning about the sport, so I'm still learning. It's Spanish. It's futsala. What is that? What is the sala? What are the versions of the game? Is it Spain, which actually I realize has won the national championships once again in futsal?
Yep.
FIFA
futsal.
FIFA futsal.
Right.
That's where I'm going with this. So, what are the different types of futsal and kind of where it came out of Spain and the linkage of that and what you saw in Colombia? And if you could take us then to what that is here.
Okay.
Is there anything is there similarities, or is it just totally different experiences?
Depends on whose club you're visiting, because there's I'd say almost every reasonable, legit club in America says that they play futsal, a couple weeks a year or something like that in the wintertime, something like that. That's where, to me, it's like flavor of the month, and you don't do it enough to really get a whole lot out of it. How I learned about futsal was simply that I went down to this school in Charlotte. Coach G basically just told me all about it, opened everything, told me about everything. And then I went back to Anson. I was like, this is your guy. This is the guy that's hair's on fire. He's the mad scientist. He's the one outside the box. And then their relationship developed. And then what was incredible next step was Coach G invited me down to their, month long. So what he does is he takes students from his club down to Medellin, Colombia every summer until COVID hit, and now we're just starting it up again. But basically, it changed. That blew me away, because when we get down there in Medellin, they barely play 11v11. So there's the big stadium, and they have clubs, Club America and Club Medellin, I think, the Reds versus the Greens, or Nacional, sorry. But basically, most of the kids down there, it's my understanding that, and I'm no expert on the history of futsal, but my understanding that is that Brazil and Colombia are the two countries in the world that play the most futsal historically. And it's 4v4 on a hard court. Down in Colombia, they play on pavement. The goalkeepers dive on pavement. And it's very simple. But what happened was FIFA, about probably 10 or 15 years ago, FIFA apparently found out about this futsal they were playing.
5v5 then.
Right. So, 5v5, so 4 on the field and a
four,
keeper.
yeah.
Exactly. So FIFA went down there and they figured it out, but then they thought it wasn't going to catch on in the rest of the world because there wasn't enough scoring. Because the rules in Brazilian and Colombian old school futsal is it's a smaller ball. You got to give throw-ins, which forces players to take the ball out of the air, which FIFA futsal is a kick-in. So you lose 90% of that receiving a ball out of the air, which is incredible for player development. So FIFA changed the rules. Bigger, bouncier ball, kick-ins instead of throw-ins to increase scoring and ease. So it's making it easier, which is backwards in terms of player development. So, and they said the keeper can throw it the whole distance, and so that's called football de sala, which I believe in Spanish is hallway, because the keeper can throw it the whole distance of the court. And what it does is it creates basically almost like a fist fight, in my opinion, because the goalkeeper traditionally just zings it down to the huge post-up center forward, and he just tries to knock it down and we go. But in old school futsal,
I love this. So real. This is what I interrupted. This is interesting. I love it because it's one of those things if you don't know better. So I prepare, and I'm not a futsal. My context of futsal, since my daughter and we play in club, is you're in the gym in the wintertime, and there are no leagues per se where we are. Okay, and if there is, there's not a coach that will teach it the certain way. It's the 11 on 11 coach that's going to do it. Anyway, if you just do your internet research, futsal is international futsal. It's the Spanish futsal. But from a purist, and where you started, you're saying that Uruguayans, Colombians, Brazilians are going to claim the 5v5 mat game, the barefoot game on the hard top with the throw-ins. That's where it started. That's what you learned. Curiosity. The younger kids in Medellin today, if they look at the international futsal, do they make fun of it?
It depends, because the fact that FIFA has accepted and changed the rules and created what's called FIFA futsal or football de sala. I think there are a lot of purists that do stick their nose up into it, or stick their nose up to it. But to me, there is a reasonable reason to think that Sala is not as good because of the player development demands. Because in Colombian and Brazilian in football de salón, which is the way they call the other one, smaller ball, got to be throw-ins, and now you can't throw it till mid-court, so you have to build out of the back.
You have to build out.
And that, to me, is everything. The last thing is that the incredible thing that I think about futsal, 2 reasons, is, one, you're never on a field more than 1 pass away from the ball, so you can't take an intellectual break, so player development jumps, in my opinion, in terms of brain work, because you can never start picking your nose or picking the daisies because you're so far away from the game. And the pressure cooker. They say it's soccer in a phone booth because there's no time and there's no pressure. So if you train in this environment with no time and no pressure, eventually when you get to age 13, 14, you make that decision. Do I want to stay inside and be a futsaler for the rest of my life, or do I want to step outside and become an 11-11 football player? At that point, when you go out and play on the grass, you're like, holy crap, what do I do with all this extra time and space?
And I could play all 11 positions probably.
Right. And the creme de la creme, in my opinion, is the size of the futsal goal is so small that it's really difficult to score. So you can't just bail out an electrolyte from 20 yards away and shoot a shot that barely dribbles to the keeper that we see in every club, in every tournament in America every weekend. You you have to actually dribble the keeper, commit the keeper to then create an angle behind the keeper for your buddy to score.
Okay, so let's take this to the coaching now, which before we get to Rosati, as you were a college coach, and the successes and failures, right? We'll talk about both from this experience. Futsal at your trainings. Did you ever talk to players about that, or was it just what you learned inherently, the virtues of futsal, the virtues of the coach's approach in Spain? As you come back to America and you have a team, talk us through a couple great seasons or two, and maybe things that didn't go so well. Because again, when it's something different,
Right.
always has if things go backwards, you get blamed for being different. I call it your courage. That's what you should do. And there's a lot of winning.
Right.
But you took courage and, did your sessions, whether Colgate or these other schools, and talk us through some examples, include specifically those experiences in Medellin and those experiences you had at Real Madrid?
100%.
Give me a couple examples. And where did it win? Where did it not win? And for that, because I think it's really helpful, one of the biggest things for us is what can we learn as a coach?
Right.
I'm going to put in our show notes, Shula Soccer. Everyone should read that. There you go. There's your Bible.
There you go.
We are not big on this podcast about giving you playbooks, and we're not here about it's going to be different for everybody. Right. For the caregiver, the parent, or the coach, they all have their own at different ages. There is no playbook and, hey, just do this recipe. But what we will do is suggest on this podcast great resources. Right. We both believe Shula Soccer is a great resource to really get into, but nothing's better than the anecdotes because you lived it. Now someone's listened to you for 45 minutes. They're getting inside the mind of Chris White. They know you've been to LaLiga. They know you've been to Medellin. They know you're a soccer coach now. They don't yet know what you've done with Rosati, really. What are you doing with those young athletes on the field? How is it that your experiences that you learned changed how you coached them?
Again, it comes back to confidence and setting up an environment and shutting up. Like, I feel much more like a farmer. I feel like my responsibility is to find the right seeds and the right vegetables to plant. But that's going to be lots of extra seeds, and we'll see who grows. But then just setting up the most fertile possible organic field in small batches that we can. And then we try to motivate as much as we can, but it's like, I coach so many kids now that it's really hard to get into every single one of them each day, like in terms of, like feedback and player analysis and all this stuff. So I really do feel much more like a farmer. And I'm a firmer believer. It all comes back to Anson, which is, I don't consider that I ever lose anymore. I know that I know how to coach at a very high level because I've seen the best coaches in the world. And I know that when I saw them doing it, I was like, yeah, that's not me doing it. They may be better than me, but it's not like they're speaking a different language. So it just gives me great confidence to set up the player environment, incredible diversity, incredible, technical demands and everything, but we hide it. It's a weird system because we hide the coaching from the kids because we want the kids to think and feel like they float in there and then they just have the best experience of their life and then they float out and they're never coached. We don't have a lot of like one way, you need to do this. Most of it is letting the game be the teacher, in 1,000 different environments. Like we change the ball size, we change the way you can score. We can change all these different things that we can control to bring out the creativity or to bring out the specific technique every day. But that's all it came from Colombia as well, because when Anson asked me to, research these futsal schools in North Carolina, and then I got invited down to Colombia, it blew my mind because I thought up to that point in my life, I thought soccer was this game. And as soon as I went down there, it was like, no, soccer's this language, and there are all these different dialects. And I've never heard it. Because when I go to Medellin, one day we go to Futsal de Sala. The next day we go to a club that plays Salon. So they're slightly different, but they're different. Then one day we go with this, Boyka, the world championship freestyler in the world, is from Medellin, and he's a very close friend of Coach G's, and he comes back to the U.S. every summer, and we actually work with him. So our students are working with the world's best freestyler. He can do a quadruple around the world. You can't even see the fourth one, it's so fast. But it's this, and then the next day we'll go to beach soccer. So it's not like the kids go down to Medellin to learn to play soccer. It's almost the opposite. They go down to Medellin to see how the ingredients that become soccer happen. You know what I mean?
So here's interesting.
And capoeira, right? They do this Brazilian military dance, which is this crazy hip opener, for the physiological piece of soccer. So it's all these different pieces that all together add up to this rich soup of...
So your team wouldn't be, I'll take it back to what I think is common in the States, where you have a club that's associated with, say, a professional team. Mm-hmm. Oh, we play their style because we get to wear their badge on a club thing. Oh, yeah. Therefore, and we lived it for my daughter. Well, sure. This is Bayern Munich related, so it's a 4-1-4-1. I'm going to play the 6th and the 4-1-4-1. Therefore, this is how I'm going to play. Right. And trainings were basically, and I've seen this with many clubs. Yeah. This isn't a club. Actually, this is better probably than you get in grassroots, where there's a much bigger conversation to get to, where they don't cut the grass, but... The problem with grassroots is they don't cut the grass. But I think one of the issues would be with you're coming in as a young player, and the coach is saying, here's what they do at that club. This is what I need you to do. And what you're saying is, based on your experiences, your college team, a session might be, okay, we're playing with a tennis ball today, or we're going to play with 4 goals. But the player didn't know. Right? The player's not saying, this is what I learned when I was in Colombia. Right. This is what I learned when I was in. We're not trying to replicate what they're doing.
Right.
So advice to coaches then, what I've heard from you, it's the confidence at some point to not think they need to speak too much.
Right.
Right? Not think they need to say, well, this is exactly what that club does. I'm going to replicate that, and you have to do this.
Right.
It's more what I'm hearing. It's a pull.
Yep.
With that athlete, not a push.
Right.
And I want to take this experience, because you had success as a college coach. Mm-hmm. You're a young man still, right? And what some would say, well, why does Chris still not coach soccer? I think that might be something. Where does Chris coach? I bet. Sure. And it's here I'd like you to tell the listeners why you started Rosati Leadership Academy. Because you could be a very successful college coach making a lot of money. And when you're a social entrepreneur, you're dealing with grants and donors, and you've sacrificed.
Right.
And you have given all of the work and all of the experience, which could be provided to parents and caregivers that have spent a lot of money or have kids going on college scholarships for top programs, right, to see them win.
Right.
Instead, you've turned as a service, as a social entrepreneur, to help our youth. Mm-hmm. Now, since I know you, I think so much of that, beyond maybe your upbringing, mom and dad, are those experiences in Spain and Colombia, what you saw.
Have to be, yeah.
But it's better to hear from you than from me. What is Rosati? And I'd like to talk about where it came from. Mm-hmm. Chris Rosati, afterwards.
Yep.
Because he's going to be very influential to this podcast
100%.
And will always be. Mm-hmm. But talk about the actual organization that you created, how long you've done it, why you did it, and link it back to the other 2 continents we've talked about. Now we're in North America. We left Spain and South America. We're now in North America.
Okay, so when I came back from Colombia, I was still coaching at Duke University, women's, with Robbie Church, Carlo Verbeck, amazing, Billy Lassane, unbelievable. I called it my finishing school in coaching because almost every day at the end of practice, in the morning we'd have our meeting and lay out practice. And then right afterwards, we would all just have these, the whiteboards, the magnetic boards, and we would just do formations. And I would just sit every day for probably 10 or 15 minutes with Robbie Church after we would lay out practice. He and I, it felt like chess, and he'd be like, okay, well, what if they play a 3-5-2? And I'd be like, okay, well, and so every day we were doing that. And so that gave me also the confidence when I became a college head coach to know that any formation that we saw, we had the exact antidote. It was Robbie Church I mean, the class, he's a gentleman in a dog-eat-dog world, he's a gentleman. And he's done it the right way, and he's put kids first, and he's put education first, and he taught me so much. I mean, I didn't come up with any of my ideas, to be honest. All my best ideas in life came from Anson Dorrance, Chris Ducart, Tony DeChico, the people down at LaLiga, people down in Colombia, Coach G, and Coach Chris McLean as well, the technical bits and all the moves and all the small-sided stuff. I have 1,000 thank yous to everybody. So I'm not an original artist. I just connect people. And I think that's what happened with the Rosati program. Like, I had my ideas about how to create a really rich club atmosphere where kids' development would absolutely explode. But at the bottom line, this is not a soccer club. This is a community club. It's about, okay, there's a bunch of people here from all over the world. You got the French-Canadian, influence in Lewiston, Auburn, the beautiful history of their immigration history and the wonderful manufacturing history of Maine. And then those factory jobs went south in the 90s, and so now you've got a community that's under a tremendous amount of pressure. And then you have another country in Europe, in Africa, that's going through civil wars and unbelievable unrest. Mm-hmm. And thank the Lord, a lot of those people got to safer places, and a lot of them ended up in the United States. But to me, it was interesting because the Somali sort of diaspora has the biggest 4 places in the United States are Portland, Maine, open-minded, ample money. Minneapolis, Minnesota, open-minded, ample money. Burlington, Vermont, ample money, ample open-minded. And Lewiston, Maine, which is a little bit of a different beast because Lewiston economically was not doing well. And so now you've got a large culture of people that for hundreds of years worked in the mills and in lumber and wonderful middle-class jobs, but now they're having a harder time making it work economically. And now you introduce another population that just looks different just based on the amount of melanin in their skin, the way they dress, mm-hmm. the food they eat, their cultural values, and, different pieces of their culture.
When you started Rosati, how many came in without shoes? Couldn't afford shoes to play? What percentage would you guess?
I'd say probably between 60 and 70% when we started. And it's weird. They don't think of it as a negative. They don't feel like exactly. I don't have shoes. I mean, sometimes you would see in between sessions a brother would hand his shoes to the other son, to the brother, because the families clearly did not have enough money to be spending disposable income on soccer shoes, which is a little bit of a luxury. Plus, the great thing about indoor soccer is, I prefer the kids to play barefoot.
Exactly.
And if it was my son or my daughter, they would be playing barefoot. Because ironically, it's much better. It's a much better way to learn. It's much better for your body, the way you move and the way you walk, and it's much better in terms of the creativity and the different surfaces you might use of your foot. So I think there's no question about it.
But you created an environment. One of the rationale for my question was just the safety that you provided for these kids after school to be in a gym, learning not only about the game of futsal, right. but life and leadership. And why you created that. But in that, what would these students, and I think, we met 5 years ago, I want to say, and I'm guessing there were 50 kids who were part of the program. Give me a sense of how many are in the program today, mm-hmm. and how has that evolved?
We work with over 200 kids a year. We have over 225 practice sessions. We had 60 young men and women who graduate out of our program, because our program is really elementary school, because we want to start young, and we actually want to start younger, and we will. But right now we start in 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, mixed gender, because at that age, developmentally, it's totally fine. And so they come into that, but then in 6th grade, they, quote unquote, they graduate into middle school, and then they become Rosati alumni. And so then they come back and they coach the younger generation, their younger brothers and sisters. So they end up coaching them. We put money in their pocket. We pay two students every day. And then once they've done 5 practices, they accrue 1 incentive card, and that's $100. Last year we gave out over $10,500 in those incentive cards, and that's money that stays in the community. That's not trickle down, that never trickles down. That's money that goes into people's hands that really need it. So we're really proud of that, but that's also our workforce development program. We're creating our own coaches now. And we follow them all the way through the pipeline. Like, because when you get into 7th grade, you can come back and coach the little kids, right after school. And then later on in the evening, the middle schoolers get their practice session. And now those middle schoolers now have a club team to compete on in the springtime. Again, everything's free, not a penny from any student for any reason. And now we have competitive teams in the spring, U15, U18, and now we're going to start a girls team this year.
Do you see the kindness from the kids? Has that evolved when you just started and you brought in a concept? I'm assuming it was early days, was all about, what did you do for conflict resolution? How did you make sure there was no fight today? Right? It was a lot of it was there.
Oh, yeah.
I remember that. And then as you become part of a program and these younger students become more mentors.
Right. It's amazing.
They see it.
Right.
Do you see random acts of kindness from your young students at a level that just make you so proud? I mean, do you note that stuff? Do you think they see it? Do you, from a standpoint of what does this mean for the community? Mm-hmm. I would view it, I would think, and I know the hard part about what you've built is that how do we make it replicable to all the other communities? Right. And that's our challenge. Yep. And that's one of the things that we want to do in bringing this to light. And one reason for this podcast is there's people out there listening, and they have to have the courage and the creativity tactically to say, wait a minute, how did Chris pull this thing off?
Yeah.
And so talk to me through if there was, and this is a bit of tactical ingredients, what would it take? Like, what did it take for you to pull it off? Like, who needed to say, Chris, I'm going to back you on this? Mm-hmm. Like, what are the groups? And if it's out there and people are listening, when we're going to put an ability in the show notes to donate to Rosati Leadership Academy and more about the organization. Mm-hmm. Awesome. But talk about the success metrics, what you need, and is it replicable?
I think it's it is and it isn't. I knew that as an outsider from away from the state of Maine that I would have no street cred. So I immediately took a job for 1 year working at the middle school directing, because I was a high school teacher for the 10 years before I switched and took the plunge to become a full-time soccer coach. So I came up here, I ran the at-risk program at the middle school, at the Lewiston Middle School for 1 year, because I knew that would get me into the underbelly of the city, and it would show me where there are pockets and where the culture and where the needs were and where the unmet needs are. And I also knew that would set me up so that I knew that I could figure out what the resources and the support systems were in the town. And so after 1 year of that, I took the plunge. I started the program, and I forget, what was the direction you just pointed me?
Kind of the resources that you needed. So you needed the school to replicate it. And it's hard because at the end of it, this is your soul has driven a lot of what is Rosati today, and we're gonna end with Chris that created it and why you created it. Right. And those random acts of kindness, it's hard to find communities that have built this. But we, even if it's not you as the coach and the administrator behind it, creating an environment for the coaches to say, hey, I think I can do this. Yeah. Or clubs, it's more the motivation and the excitement and the inspiration. Mm-hmm.
I think it starts at a very organic level of, I don't care about winning anymore, and I don't care about making money, and I don't care if I'm the best club in North Carolina or the best club in New York or the best club in Arizona. I think the confidence has given me the ability to know that the small batch sort of work that's very, with futsal, it's like a magnifying glass. So in soccer, when I'm coaching back to pressure center forwards, linking with midfielders to try to create space and goal scoring opportunity in the final third, you only have 3 or 4 different options. But when you bring the futsal option into it, and now you're maybe holding them off, now you look at 6 different ways to get past. So it's like putting it under a microscope, and then if you learn those things, the rest of the stuff just falls into place. So some of the stuff's very intricate and very hard to replicate. Other things are as easy as possible to replicate. I mean, basically we needed a play, because basically we exist in antithesis of pay to play, right? There's this system in America, And some other countries, but thankfully not too many countries, where you have to pay, and sometimes it's a lot of money to be able to have your son or daughter play in these leagues, and the travel and the meals and the referee fees and the field fees and the uniform fees and all these ridiculous $200 cleats that are an absolute joke in my opinion. Sorry, Nike and Adidas. But yeah, we set it up very organically, players first, and our idea was no barriers. Because basically it hit us in the face one day. One of the reasons why American soccer cannot, on the men's side, compete at the highest levels is because we only let middle class and upper middle class kids play soccer. And every once in a while we'll grab a kid and scholarship them, but that's got a whole set of challenges and whatever. I don't agree that scholarships can save the system, and I don't believe the system serves us very well. So I'm anti-pay to play, generally speaking, and I try to get rid of those obstacles. And I have a huge team around me. I don't do anything. Everything happens because this huge team that we've created around us. And so basically, we had to have. So what are the barriers, right? One of them is travel. Okay, so we have to have a field that's walking distance to the downtown. That's a non-negotiable, right? So we have to find a gym that's cleared. And the reason we're futsal based is because of all those player development exponential drivers, but also because we don't get shut down in thunderstorms, we don't get shut down with flooding, we don't get shut down in the wintertime with snow. We've literally played soccer through huge snowstorms when the schools are shut down.
Yeah.
And we still play because when you look out into our parking lot, there are no real car tracks, but there are 100 different footpaths because our kids all walk to the old decommissioned school that we would play in. So our kids were playing, 5 days a week. We actually played 7 days a week for a couple of years there. So, that's part of our recipe is we play more than anybody else. But we also play indoors. So it's like playing in a pressure cooker. So the player development explodes. And the kindness, the discipline system was incredible. Coach McGraw, again, one of these seminal people that opened the doors for us in Lewiston. He's a Hall of Famer, taught at Lewiston High School for 45 years, coached soccer for, I think, 42 years. He's the one that was here when the first sort of cultural, the Somali sort of immigration pattern began here, back when the Lewiston High School boys soccer was all Caucasian kids. And so he sort of managed, that could have been riots, that could have been hatred, that could have been confusion and fear. But this beautiful man and his team around him, Kim Wetlaufer, who's our vice president, who's the Booster Club president, and lots of the fathers and mothers of the Somali kids all together just sort of, it came to pass, and it's beautiful. And now everybody's supportive, and now it's a pride thing for Lewiston, because soccer was never Lewiston. Ice hockey was Lewiston's bread and butter.
I'm a perpetual optimist, as are you, and there are hundreds, if not thousands, of communities globally that would have a similar, all you need is a gym.
Yep.
And even in shoeless soccer, within the walls of the community center or in the church or the Sears that went under,
right,
or all these empty buildings, you don't need a lot.
Right.
I think what it becomes is just a community and a ball of any size without shoes, right, and coaches that are relatively quiet.
Yep.
And let the kids play and not worry about the age.
Yep.
And I think what's wonderful is that this can happen at age 5, 6, 7.
100%.
It can also happen for people in their 40s and 50s.
Absolutely.
And that's what's so interesting about this play is that, so many people inspiring the game, you just need a ball in a space, and it's that's what makes the game beautiful.
Right.
But there's also, to your point, which we want to highlight, there's parts that aren't that beautiful in the beautiful game. Right. And it was that pay to play, and has that to the extent that one thing Rosati does that I want to highlight is it gives opportunity to those that would not have had it.
Right.
So that's excellent. So let's get to where it came from. And this is where we're going to end our podcast. But it's a dear friend of yours, Chris Rosati, and he passed from ALS. He did something, and I'll let you expand on them because you knew him well. But what Chris did in the years before his passing, just for folks that don't know, if you have ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, you typically have 2 or 3 years to live. Chris doubled that. with his strength. Now, I didn't know Chris, but this goes back 10 years ago for context. But I've watched and read and watched a video, I'd say not less than 100 times, because that's how much it touched me, what he did and what you created as a result of that. But what Chris had done was gave a thought with the butterfly effect, being, which we know, really at the end of the day, it's the world's interconnected. That's the bottom line, what the butterfly effect is. But any son of, you flap your wings here, and then there's a hurricane on the other side of the world, right? That's the analogy. Right. It came out of meteorology. Actually came out in the 1960s in my research. That's where the whole notion came. It was to prove meteorological impact, butterfly effect. However, what your friend, Chris Rosati, thought in 2015 about was that he wanted to see if the butterfly effect could be used for a random act of kindness. Mm-hmm. And whether it was he or his wife gave two kids $50 bills at a diner and said, go make a difference with that. And as the story goes, and he wrote this in his final letters, months later, he got an email from Africa, Sierra Leone, and it said, big poster, thank you for the kindness, Chris. And they fed an entire African tribe. And it just so happens that these two kids had a dad that worked at the Peace Corps, and they decided to funnel those into this African tribe. Mm-hmm. Chris had no idea. When they left the $50 at that diner, that he'd get an email from Africa.
Right.
Well, that's Durham, North Carolina to Africa. That is the butterfly effect.
Right.
He then goes on and gives in the assembly at the high school kind of a $50 seed to every single student. And says, go do something, make someone's day better. Yep. There's a lot of great stories around Chris Rosati. So what do I take out of that? These little things, and it's so minor compared to what you've lived and why you your friendship with him and creating Rosati Leadership Academy, because it's him as a person plus these experiences that we've talked about that have created Rosati, and it's awesome. Right. But I'm going to give you just one little anecdote, which is so random, but I know it's going to impact a kid. Mm-hmm. So this last spring in club soccer, U17 era, after my daughter plays, and we're watching a game, we're playing some town from, I think, Connecticut, and a girl gets injured. And the coach on the other team doesn't actually care, doesn't get up. Mm-hmm. The players are just sitting there. Mm-hmm. So, when someone's injured, everyone takes a knee. Yeah. And they were sitting there, we're like, what's going on? And I remember I'm fairly talkative on the sidelines. You know me. I'm asking parents around me, does anyone care? This kid's hurt, and not one player has come over to help her. Yeah. Okay? So one of our players came over. This is for our team. Girl puts her arm around her, and it was an ankle or something. She couldn't walk. Literally limped her off the field. Yeah. About 50 steps. Mm-hmm. I actually asked some of the parents of the other team later if there was any problem. I wanted to understand why no one cared. Mm-hmm. It just happened that our player looked at a painful player and brought her over to seat her down in her injury. Yeah. That player after the game goes to a player on our club and said, that was the nicest thing. Thank you so much. Okay? It's so minor that someone on our team would help a player off the field. Yeah. I wonder from the butterfly effect, that student has no idea who this girl from Maine is, who's this 17-year-old girl from Connecticut. Right. How is her life going to change next time somebody's hurt? I can see, as you saw that kid and was the only one that said hi to that kid that let you get to the LaLiga, yep. That girl probably saying, look, somebody cares about me. Right. And that random act of kindness from someone on our team, I think so highly of our club and our player and this person for caring enough. Yeah. Now, look, it's very minor in the grand scheme of things. Could have huge effects. Right. We don't know. Right. When Chris Rosati gave $50, knowing he has not much longer to live, the effect that he's had, not only in Africa, but to school kids and your peace, how much does that affect you? how much did it affect you at the timing when you decided to create Rosati Leadership Academy?
Mm-hmm.
And talk us through kind of the emotional side of it when you build this organization. It's a nonprofit, right? Mm-hmm. After Chris Rosati.
Yep.
How much does that mean to you? Your relationship with him and building it?
It's everything. I mean, at the time I was at Duke University coaching with Robbie Church, and it was amazing. And Chris, as his time was running out on earth, it's like you're talking about the $50 that he gave. I would argue that his time is 1,000,000 times more valuable, and it absolutely blew me away. It was weird. I would see Chris, but the thing about Chris was he brought like 3 or 4 different aged friend groups together. And so he was the social butterfly that could bring everybody together, and that's why I got reconnected with him. But to bring the kindness, I grew up thinking soccer was a sport, like any other sport. And in the last 5 years, I've been educated so much in what soccer really means. Because, like in Spain, I noticed that these kids would juggle a ball to school. I was like, wow, so their passion level's really high. Okay. So then I went down to Colombia, same sort of thing, passion level, creativity, this, that, and the other. But when I got back, and as I've sort of gone through these experiences, and especially Chris, it brought me home. Like, I thought soccer was just a sport, right? But then when I came to Lewiston and started coaching and started the Rosati program, I realized, one of the young men that was our assistant coach told me that the reason they love soccer so much was because in the 10 years they spent in the refugee camps in Kenya and Ethiopia, that was the only thing they could do to stop feeling hungry. And that just slaps me in the face with a 2x4. Like, I never thought of that. Like, holy crap, I'm so arrogant and stupid and privileged that I don't even tap into that. But at the same time, it made me understand that soccer's not just some sport you play on the weekend. It's more like a religion. It's more like an everyday part of culture. And then to further it, it's like you look around in Lewiston and you talk to the police and the principals and the leaders, and they're talking about, insane rates of homelessness, insane rates of drug use, violence, gang-related activities. This is a bunch of people from another country that have been dropped into a new country, so of course it's going to take a while to figure everything out. But like right now, things are stressful. So for me to think that we're part of a soccer program that's actually preventing gun violence and preventing, homelessness and violence. I mean, our kids, they hear gunshots every night. When there was a mass shooting, the whole country heard about Lewiston. Mm-hmm. But the dirty truth is that same day that happened, a cop turned to me and said, you know what the dirtiest part of this whole thing is? These kids hear gunshots and see shootings every night. They're just not mass events. So these kids are traumatized every night by this. So now I'm thinking, so Rosati Soccer is not just a place to go. It's a place where you can survive, and it's a place where you can get better. I mean, our basic 4 goals are better relationships with teachers, which is basically conflict resolution, which we do. That's probably our number 1 goal. The second one is correlated to the first one, which is your grades should improve based on your more trusting relationships with teachers. The third one is get better at soccer, which is by far the easiest part. I mean, if you know what you're doing, soccer improvement is no problem. And the last one is the most important one, which is put it all together, better life outcomes after high school. Do they go work for their parents? Do they volunteer for a couple of years? Do they start at a 2-year college? Do they start a 4-year college? Like, no matter what their pathway is, we want them to do better.
And those 4 tenets, while massively important for the Rosati context, transcend to every demographic, every socioeconomic. It's the same piece, right? Yeah. The conflict in your relationships is more important than your soccer talent.
100%.
Because you're a player as part of a team, and making people better around you, that's the first part of it. Right. They want to play with you. Right. So those core tenets is powerful. So if Chris Rosati were here today, and he could come to one of your afternoon sessions where the boys and the girls are together, and you could introduce him. He is from, again, I've never met the man, obviously. I don't think he would ask about himself. It wouldn't be about him. He would want to ask them questions. he would want to, from my understanding, what do you think he would say to those kids when you introduce, because you've introduced me at once or twice when my daughter and I would come volunteer years in the past.
Amazing.
And it was fun.
Yeah.
And it's humbling.
Yeah.
And I would hope anybody, if you have the opportunity to be a mentor at any age, do it. It's the greatest thing in the world. But if Chris Rosati could see, not that this is Rosati Leadership Academy and look what he accomplished in his name, no. What would he ask and what would he challenge those boys and girls with? It's a hard question to ask because Chris is Chris and you're Chris White, but what do you think he would impart on those kids?
I don't know what questions he would ask him, but I think my feedback after seeing him interact would be it's almost like what they used to say about Michael Jordan. They said that Michael Jordan used to sit in the huddle and it looked like he was trying to dig into the coach's soul, which was how engaged he was and how much he was learning. Chris, the thing that just blew me away was over time, he lost his ability to move so much, and he never stopped asking about the program. He probably started asking me about the program more. And then it progressed, and then he had to go to a trach, and then he had the ability, this beautiful iPad with eye recognition. It was incredible. But as he got closer and closer to transitioning to heaven, he focused less on himself and more on other people. It was incredible. One of the last days I ever saw him, he was in his car, riding in his car. You know, it was a wheelchair accessible. It was amazing. And for whatever reason, I was walking, and he just saw me, and I waved to him, and they pulled over. He was with Anna, his wife, and they pulled over. And it was crazy. As soon as the window comes down, how's the program going? Because I was supposed to start this program back when I was at Duke. But then other things happened, and other opportunities happened, and it got delayed a couple years. But it just knocked me down the way he stopped thinking about himself, and I keep thinking about that video of the Navy SEALs where they all get thrown in the pool with their hot hands and legs tied, and there are a couple people that just go to the bottom of the pool, and they just push people up, like with their hands tied, and so they can't breathe, and every once in a while they have to go breathe, but it's just. He didn't care that his time was going. All he cared about was, if I'm alive, I need to invest in kids. And he invested in his two daughters beautifully, but more, and everybody says the same thing. Because we rallied around him, because when we went to hang out with him, there weren't tears. There was laughing. It was amazing the way he set that tone. And so it was joyful. Every time we'd see him, it was absolutely joyful. And his sense of style was incredible. He'd wear the velour. He had this velour Adidas
Yeah,
suit.
I saw something about that.
And he had like 7 different kinds of gazelles with different colors. He had unbelievable style. So I tell the kids every day, Chris is up at poolside in a sweet velour Adidas, track suit with a drink in his hand, wearing the sweet gazelles, laughing his butt off, sending us little messages.
I think that's the key to, how we're going to end this, the butterfly effect. It started with, we'd argue, the greatest, at least one of the greatest soccer coaches of all time, at least in the domestic standpoint, in Anson Dorrance. And that his flapping of wings let you get yourself to Spain and Colombia. Chris Rosati's flapping of wings gave you and I'd argue kind of the courage to say, you know what, I'm going to do this. Of all the other things I'm going to do. And you took the pieces from what you learned from Anson and what you learned internationally. I've seen it now at Rosati Leadership Academy. It's inspirational. It's things we want to highlight in Footy4MySoul. This is really meant for someone that's going to listen. And, spending 90 minutes of your day, even in today's world where that means you might take 6 different sessions on your phone or in bed or in the shower. That's how people listen to and consume media today. Yeah. But if someone is to spend 90 minutes I'm humbled, you're humbled to listen to this story. We do this because of the inspired player that might actually be our age that can do this.
Mm-hmm.
There's also an inspired player who's like 8 or 10 years old or 15 that might listen to this and say, you know what? I'm going to pick that kid up because the team's not taking care of her, because that's going to mean something.
It's everything.
It's everything. And where did it come from? The system? I think we were thinking differently. We were courageous. We were curious to get ourselves outside of our comfort zone. Mm-hmm. And for that we're going to end, we will always end a podcast for Footy for My Soul with a legacy question. And this is not a morbid question, not meant the day you and I are no longer around and someone writes a nice paragraph, which hopefully is not done on ChatGPT, but they actually write a nice one about when people do move on. But really what we're all about is our soul, right? Mm-hmm. And if you think about just from the mind, we're always concerned with what's in our mind, right? Mm-hmm. So in our mind, it's our thoughts and beliefs. And then we've got our emotions and our actions that mess with those thoughts and beliefs. That's day to day, that's present, that's the stuff that attacks us, wins and loses, it's all in our mind. But our soul, that's eternal.
Yep.
That's what you're all about.
Mm-hmm.
It's timeless. And when you're not here anymore, like Rosati's not here anymore, mm-hmm. everybody's going to move on in their life.
Sure.
And I'm not asking you the question in the context of your mom or your dad or your closest friends. I mean, in the context of soccer and leadership, footy, futsal, everything you've done in the sport. If someone thinks about what is your soul, the soul in the context of this game, what is that lasting legacy? What was it all about? Your deepest soul, what is it all about for you?
I'll just plagiarize. Anson Dorrance wants on his gravestone to say, he lived to invest in us. And that's what I want to be remembered for. But there's also another one that I'm not thinking of right now. What do I want to be remembered for? I want to be remembered.
Take your time.
Just for giving every kid a chance and for dedicating my heart and soul to everything. And then bring it back together with Chris's words, because Chris's sort of two huge phrases were be kind and worry less. You know, not just worry less, but don't worry about things you can't control, essentially. And so those are two of our mindfulness goals. We have a rotating set of mindfulness goals. We do mindful breathing. We do that whole sort of, it's wonderful. But I would sign off with his, which is be kind, worry less.
And we're going to end everything on a very positive note, because that is a positive note. That's an uplifting note. It's a thoughtful note, because it's hard to think about. You spent your whole life doing something because you care, right. Okay? And often, sometimes it's like, well, maybe you were misunderstood. Maybe all the things you thought you did wasn't right. Mm-hmm. And always you're going to think about all the wins and all the good things. Yeah. And you just shared what's the good thing. And I think people that have been around you, advice to them is this is all doable. This is a positive outcome.
This is doable. I love that.
It's all doable. So I would love to have you do another podcast with me someday.
Let's go.
Put me in,
coach.
Put me in, coach. I would love to talk about the book. I might actually ask you to do about shoeless soccer. I'd love to analyze that book with you someday.
I'd love to.
Let's make that something we do in future years. But for at least this episode of Footy for My Soul, if we go back on leadership and mentorship, mm-hmm. and what we can learn from international, what we can learn for social entrepreneurship, what we can learn about someone that you care greatly about, who cared greatly about others, and that butterfly effect. I hope, I know you do too, that people listen, whether you're a player, a coach, or a caregiver, or a mentor, that there's something that you can take out of this. To make the game more beautiful. 100%. And that's why we do it. So thank you.
Yeah, can I just add one last little story?
Of course you may.
So, completely ironic again, we've been going for 6 years. This is our 7th year. One of our wonderful young men was asked a couple weeks ago to describe what he liked most about the Rosati Leadership Academy. And we don't make kindness like, it's not like emblazoned anywhere necessarily. I mean, it's part of what we do, but it's not like the center point always. And he was asked, but like 4 or 5 other kids were asked, like, what's the coolest thing about Rosati? And they all said the same thing, the kindness. And to me, hearing that is maybe the most important thing that I've ever heard from that culture, is because it's come from Chris, it's come from Anson, it's come from the soul of all these kids, and now they're reproducing that culture of kindness and leadership and understanding and inclusion.
And that's not a dopamine hit. That's a real hit.
Well, that's the last thing.
That's the real thing. This is real, sustainable caring. You don't just say that.
Right.
It's not a checkbox.
Right.
Kindness is a word which you have to think about.
Right.
Fun is a word you don't have to think about.
Right.
Like, it's there.
Right.
It's fun. No. Kindness is thoughtful.
Yeah.
So I think that's great.
And when the college kids, a lot of the college kids come in and mentor and volunteer with us, and they all say the same thing. Selfishly, they feel better leaving practice than when they got there, just because the environment, I get it, but it's the kids. The kids are just beautiful. And I don't think that's unique to any culture. I think young kids anywhere in the world have that same sort of drive to, do the right thing, be loving, even if they don't put it in those words. And that's the real meaning of life as far as I'm concerned. Soccer is life, baby.
Oh, that's Rojas from Ted Lasso.
Yeah.
Football is life.
It's true.
On that note, thank you again, sir.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Chris.